held on the 14th of August 2024. Councillor Allison, he's online. He did have technical issues earlier. We have Councillor Anderson, Councillor Barker. We have apologies from Councillor Chalmers, but we have Councillor Frame here as a substitute. We have Councillor Clark. I'll just check if we've got Councillor Cooper. Yeah, we have Councillor Cooper. I'll just check if we have Councillor Dewar. And we have Councillor Dewar. We have apologies from Councillor Fagan. Just checking whether we've got Councillor Gowland. We don't seem to have Councillor Gowland. I'll check if we have Councillor Hamilton. We do have Councillor Hamilton. I'll just check for Councillor Keat. We don't seem to have Councillor Keat. Check for Councillor Lambie. We have Councillor Lambie. We have Councillor Lockhart. I have apologies from Councillor Loudon. We have Councillor Mars. We have Councillor McAdams. I have apologies from Councillor Leslie MacDonald. We have Councillor McDougall. We have apologies from Councillor McGeever, and we have Councillor Brown here as a substitute. We have Councillor Nugent. I'll just check for Councillor Razak. We don't seem to have Councillor Razak. We have Councillor Robb. I'll just check for Councillor Ross. We have Councillor Ross. We have Councillor Scott. We have Councillor Thompson, Councillor Toner, Councillor Walker, and I'll just check for Councillor Williams. And we have Councillor Williams. Is there anyone I've missed? I appreciate there might be substitute members. Okay, and with that, I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thanks everyone for attending today. Can I ask if there's any declarations of interest, please? We haven't been notified of any. Nope. Thank you. If you've all had a chance to look at the minutes, can we approve them as a correct record? Yep, thank you very much. Okay, right on to item 3. This is for noting. Really looking forward to this. I'd like to introduce you to Sage, who's our PhD student at the council, working out of Glasgow Caledonian. Really looking forward to her presentation on social vulnerability amid the just transition in South Lanarkshire, really important issues. Looking forward to hearing more. Carry on, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. I'm Sage Kewins. Oh, let me get my presentation up for you.
Should be. There we go. There we go.
There we go. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very excited to share with you the culmination of several months of research in collaboration with South Lanarkshire Council, where my focus has been on understanding and addressing social vulnerability amid just transition to net zero. My research aims to assess vulnerability and adaptive capacity in relation to climate change in South Lanarkshire, which will inform interventions essential for facilitating a just transition. To accomplish this aim, I will first identify vulnerable communities aided by the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. I will then conduct a capacity assessment of these communities' ability to participate in the adaptation and decarbonisation of housing and mobility. Based on the results, I will advise on measures for achieving a just transition focused on adaptation and building climate resilience for those most at risk. I do this in an effort to implement procedural justice through community engagement to ultimately contribute to the advancement of just transition and adaptation policy in South Lanarkshire. Now, South Lanarkshire has a population of about 320,000 people, with 25% residing in rural areas and 75% in urban areas. Therefore, population distribution is inverse to South Lanarkshire's land area. Deprived communities are characterized by low income, poor health, low educational attainment, lack of access to learning opportunities and employment, and low expectations. The red dots on this map represent the 20% most deprived areas in South Lanarkshire. It may look insignificant, but they make up 20% of South Lanarkshire's data zones. These areas also tend to be most impacted by climate change. which leaves us with the question of how we tackle these pressing issues of social inequity and climate change at the same time. One way to accomplish such transformative change is through just transition, a concept emphasizing equitability in the process of transitioning to a post-carbon society. Climate change impacts everyone differently, with the most vulnerable tending to suffer the greatest consequences. But just transition provides us with the rare opportunity to restructure our society in a way that is both sustainable and equitable. The Just Transition Commission was established to ensure Scotland transitions to net zero by 2045 at the latest. This deadline is enforced by the Climate Change Bill that was instituted in 2015, meaning that South Lanarkshire Council must produce various policies which facilitate meeting these climate targets. So it is clear that transition is inevitable, but I would like to emphasize that justice is not. South Lanarkshire is already seeking to develop their existing strategies in alignment with their commitment to reaching net zero, including considerations of vulnerability. The Council's current approaches and priorities have guided my research into transitioning the housing and transport sectors, where I expand on the opportunities and challenges of reducing vulnerability in the interest of justice. So beginning with housing, there are a number of market, state, cultural, and technical challenges associated with transition to a just housing sector. Among the most significant are housing insecurity and fuel poverty, but logistically, even the retrofitting of mixed tenure blocks can present issues of responsibility. Who pays for just transition really matters, especially when you consider that 22% of South Lanarkshire's population are living in fuel poverty. This is actually among the lower rates of fuel poverty in Scotland, but the goal of Just Transition is to reduce this number as much as possible. That entails targeting interventions to where fuel poverty is most acutely experienced, like in rural communities. It also means ensuring that the financial burden of transitioning away from fossil fuels is not placed on those who are vulnerable. So what are some of the ways we can reduce vulnerability moving forward? Affordable social housing is crucial. There are also shared equity housing models like community land trusts and co-ops, which prioritize community cohesion and affordability. Finally, it is not only essential to provide renewable energy sources, but to ensure that houses are energy efficient to reduce energy consumption. Moving on to mobility, transitioning to a just transport sector brings its own set of challenges. Among them are the ethics of low emission zones and electric vehicles, which reduce carbon emissions but raise questions of socioeconomic equity. Scotland also faces the issue of a largely privatized public transport sector, which limits the government's influence in decision-making around issues like improving rural transport links and handling gender-based violence. The future of sustainable travel lies in shared mobility, which provides the opportunity to designate accessible centers for transport. Now imagine a place where you can catch the train or a bus, borrow a car or a bike, even pick up your parcels. This measure simultaneously promotes community engagement, emissions reductions, and active travel, all of which are important elements of a just transition. So now that we have an idea of where we're going, let's discuss how we get there. Just transition is a process as opposed to an end goal, and in recognition of its cyclical nature, I've adopted participatory action research as my methodology for this study. This research represents the planning stage of the process. Action will come in the form of policy making. While the output of this research will be generated with the intention of supporting the production of these policies, it will ultimately be the responsibility of South Lanarkshire Council to institute these changes, repeating the process as necessary to monitor and improve outcomes for its residents. This methodology was chosen to highlight the role participatory democracy plays in securing a just transition for all of South Lanarkshire's residents, particularly those most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, a priority which is reflected in my methods of data collection. Mixed methods are used in this project to gain a comprehensive understanding of interventions necessary to reduce vulnerability. I'm conducting focus groups first to gauge communities' capacity to participate in climate adaptation and decarbonization efforts, the results of which will be used to inform the questions I'll ask in interviews and surveys. This is to ensure that the issues covered in the thesis reflect South Lanarkshire residents' concerns. Each focus group consists of 4 to 8 people. There will be 12 in total, with 3 focus groups held in each locality listed on the map. Using a combination of SIMD information, protected characteristics, and relevance to the study's themes, I've identified several stakeholder groups which I am collaborating with to establish their community's needs. Based on the 4 focus groups I've conducted so far, I have found that climate adaptation does not seem to be a priority among most participants. However, the issues they've identified in their communities often relate to climate issues and equity concerns. Climate-focused community groups have found success in highlighting the co-benefits of climate action to promote sustainable behaviors. An example of this would be emphasizing the health benefits of riding a bike rather than associated emission reductions. Yet there's a notable desire for education on climate change so that people can feel more empowered to take action. These findings and more will be synthesized in my thesis to support the production of the LDP3, with particular focus placed on mitigating and adapting to climate change. I will produce an evidence report this coming April, which will use the data collected to establish our current situation and inform paths forward. My thesis will be submitted alongside the LDP3 proposal so that my findings can be incorporated into the policy before it is published in 2027. In summary, themes of vulnerability and adaptive capacity are explored through the lens of housing and mobility using mixed method action research, the result of which will be bespoke policy interventions co-developed with South Lanarkshire residents. I've listed my references if you would like to learn more, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation today. If you would like to support my research, please send me an email. I'm interested in including the Council's perspective on these issues as well. So if you would be willing to do a short interview with me, it would greatly enhance the quality of this research. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Sage. Ross, just, I know there was time for questions. Do you have something you wanted to raise straight away?
Less so questions, more just, thank you very much for the work you're doing, will be doing, and that, detailed presentation of it. So certainly going to be a really interesting piece of work, really keen to find out, specific actions that, we can take as a council in the future. Really positive to see that community engagement, participatory democracy element of it. I think obviously that's going to be key moving forward to take communities with us and, fighting climate change and biodiversity loss. So just really to see, thank you for that. I'm looking forward to seeing the, how it unfolds. Happy to, help and engage with it. And I assume we'll be able to get a copy of that presentation. But again, thank you.
Can I open it up to any other questions? Oh, Councillor Barker, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that report. I do have to say it's one of the clearest, most precise reports I've had in committee. I know we may be just talking about 20% or so of the population who probably don't speak up for themselves very well. The 2 points I would like to make, and one on heating, is this latest idea that that wood stoves are not is not renewable energy. It really just seemed to turn things on its head, and in the rural area, that is an obvious source of heating, especially for the most kind of isolated settlements. I think the other one that is more important, and you did mention it, is on transport and the number of people who do not have access to a car. And is access to a car the whole answer anyway? So the 2 obvious things there are the number of campaign groups for public transport, and yet they get nowhere. It's just a case of, oh, it's too expensive, no business case. And the main issue, I suppose, it's out of Scotland's hands. But we've had something like 14 years when road fuel duty has been frozen, while every year public transport fares are increased and it just, it just doesn't make sense. And yes, I know electoral sense. Nobody dares say anything against freezing road fuel duty. Nobody get elected on that basis of putting it up. But that really does affect any progress towards a just transition. Thanks very much, and thanks for your presentation again.
Thanks very much. Does anyone want to come back on any of those issues? Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Councillor Barker. So you make some valid points here, and before I start as well, to say thanks very much to Sage. I thought it was an excellent presentation. The issue around about transport, I think it's an issue that we've discussed on a number of occasions, and it's going to continue to be a challenge for us as well. We engage through Colin and his road service. We engage with a range of partners across transport, and you're absolutely right. The challenges around about how to ensure that we have a comprehensive and usable transport, public transport network, and the challenges around about how that can be funded are challenges at a national level as well as within the council. But I suppose, I don't know if Colin's got anything you want to add to that, but that we do appreciate the challenges around about that. Thanks.
Thanks, David. I think just first of all, can I say it's a fantastic presentation, and more than happy to have a chat with you if you want to have a wee interview, and don't give me too many hard questions. But I think picking up on Councillor Barker's point and David's as well there, in terms of taking forward any infrastructure or new development or services or whatever, it needs funding. So yeah, we do go through kind of challenging business case processes, and sometimes the figures don't add up at the end. What we're trying to do now is we're engaging through the local transport strategy development, and I'll be coming to committee towards the end of this year, and that will set the kind of future for kind of transport investment across South Lanarkshire. We might not have the funding now, but if we have a strategy in place that's been built upon discussions with our communities, where their needs are, identifying the problems, many of which Sage has kind of picked up on, when funding does become available, we've got a policy position to take. And I think a couple of the slides from Sage there talked about one of the early stages of making the just transition is to have a strong policy position. So whether that be through LDP or through the local transport strategy or the national transport strategy as well, that's what we're looking to do now. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Over to Bert, who's next up for a question.
Chair, some comments and observations. I was part of a social inclusion partnership that dealt with multiple poverty, deprivation, etc. And the old thing that solved that and solved most things is money, because that time they invested money, and the money we can do things. We then get 2 extra policemen and an extra sergeant. We get new play parks. We get investment in a thing called Hyper Cyper. So innovative ideas, new things that kept children busy, young people, etc. And everything else needs money. So the things will need to get money here to make sure these things are taken care of. And I hope you can do that. Participatory budget, anything you participate in. I'm going to ask you here, how do we get people? I've got a lot of things in Blantyre well attended, but in Blantyre, and I've seen in other areas, I do look at other areas, it seems to be a lot of the time the same people that attend everything. How can we get more young people involved and more diverse participation? If you don't mind saying that. And by the way, I reflect what the people are saying, that a brilliant presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In terms of young people's engagement, we've got the Youth Sustainability Forum, but I think reaching out beyond the usual suspects is a good idea. And I think Sage's work intends to do that, to reach people who maybe wouldn't think climate is a thing for them. Do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Thompson. And as Kirsten has highlighted, there is a range of engagement in terms of the climate change agenda that we have through schools and through our community, and some of the work that Sage has done so far and will continue to do will continue to involve younger people in this. In terms of that broader question about participatory budgeting, we do try as a council to try and engage through participatory budgeting across a range of different areas of the population, younger people and older people as well, and those of deprived areas and those in more affluent areas as well, in order to get that broad scope. But the participatory budgeting process sits somewhere else within the council on a different resource, but I'm happy to take your point and raise it with them to make sure we do get younger people involved. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks very much for your answer. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Over to Councillor Allison. Alex.
Yeah, couple of things. First, I fully agree that we do need to look at rural transport. There's a major problem there, but I don't think we should be taking the attitude that if we sort rural transport, everything's fine. Because quite simple, we are never going to be able to get a transport system that covers everybody on every opportunity unless you have empty buses running around most of the time, which will do nothing for our climate change agenda. The questions I was wanting to ask were more around how they intend to look at the climate change issue. At the moment, we keep talking about net zero, and then all we're talking about is emissions. There is no link with what other issues may happen if we simply cut emissions. Are we cutting the amount of carbon that's been sequestrated? We can then look at what we're doing for some of the housing projects and putting in air-source heat pumps. That, if you do it to the least well-off in the community, is making them more energy poor, because the cost of running these in terms of electricity is significant. Nothing seems to be followed through. We seem to be taking a headline and trying to engage with that. Can you give us any assurance that that's going to change and try and look at the unintended consequences of what we're applying to ensure that we are genuinely reducing our carbon footprint, not just the carbon footprint, but actually starting to work to get to net zero, because we're not at the moment.
Yeah, I think maybe just a wee quick comment. I think sustainability is all about integrated thinking. So it's about getting all those co-benefits, whether it's addressing fuel poverty at the same time or rural transport issues, which is absolutely a major thing as well. But you want to say a bit more, David, if you want?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Councillor Allison. And I suppose, again, I think you've quite succinctly described the challenge of the situation that we face. It's such a massive undertaking, and to, you know, when we look even at our building stock, at our housing stock, in terms of the challenge, the costs that faces, and the difficulties that we have as we go through that process of making sure that we don't leave people behind as well, and that we take account of things such as just a transition. What I would say is that we're still at early stages on this. It's Housing and Tech are doing a range of work, and I don't know if he wants to come in on any of that, but there are a number of initiatives that across our estate that we are looking at, and we're looking at the wider estate. And we do try, as we bring forward sort of capital projects, to try and make sure that we do build in the future sustainability of everything we do moving forward. But there's a huge legacy issue around about the things that we've got, the issues around about public transport. But you're absolutely right in what you say. It's something that covers everything that we do, and we are trying to kind of make inroads into that. But we are still at an early stage, and it is a massive challenge. I don't know, Stephen, do you want to come in? Thanks.
Councillor Allison, I take on board fully the just transition, and I think we've mentioned before about air source. To date, it's only been on systems that have been off gas grid that have been transitioned to air source because of, exactly as you say, the additional costs. And I think at the previous committee I mentioned the difference between the gas to electricity rate, and how there is no way that we could justify just now transitioning people on the gas grid to electricity. And unfortunately, 85% of our domestic stock is on gas grid, is heated. So it's a big blocker. But in order to do that at some point in the future, there needs to be that reallocation of cost differential, which I've mentioned before, to gas to electricity. So there's no current plans to move people from the gas grid to air source or other types of electric heating at this time, because you're right, it would put people into further risk of fuel poverty if they weren't already in that position. But it's a huge exercise, huge exercise, 85% of our housing stock.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, could I come back in, Chair?
Sure.
Yeah, it's regarding what you're saying there just now, but this, we're talking about the rural area. I don't think there's many gas networks in the rural area. So it's a different question that's been asked. Still in the rural area, if you change to air source heat pumps just now, you will be increasing significant, even with well-insulated houses, you will be increasing your fuel costs. You can't compare it to the urban area, and you can't include the urban area in those discussions.
I think we've mentioned previously in committees about this differential between the cost of gas and electricity, and that's a kind of Westminster decision about changing that. There might be something, but we've talked before about the importance of the fabric first approach as well, insulating first before doing any renewable technology. Is there anything you want to add, Stephen, to that? No? Okay. Thank you. And finally, John Ross.
Yes, thanks, Kirsten. Listened to quite a lot of the comments from a number of different councillors, and obviously the presentation, which was exceptional. This is a multifaceted problem, and it doesn't help South Lanarkshire being very much rural and urban. There's other things that we obviously need to take into consideration as well. When we talked about in the Glasgow City region, the idea that we could now be using the Clyde for water source heating systems as well, small community things, the length of the Clyde, which may help in the future as well. And also, Alex should know, Councillor Barker was talking about transport in the rural area. Both Alec and I are board members of SPT, and we have, on a long-term basis, a look at the idea of franchising transport. Now, if it's the right franchise, and it is to take care of local and rural areas, then hopefully that will improve the situation. However, it will take probably between 5 and 7 years before it is fully integrated. But I'm hopeful that whatever system eventually comes through, that if it's a proper franchise system, they will be obligated to make sure that rural areas have a decent transport system, which will help in the long term. There is also another item on the agenda later on where we're looking at Glasgow City region and the idea of infrastructure change, and just exactly as you said, Kirsten, the idea of making homes much more adverse to the elements. So, from that point of view, there's a lot going on, but it is a huge problem, and one that I think all of us that know a wee bit about it know that it's going to be a huge problem going forward, and one which everybody needs to pile into in order to try and get somewhere if we're all intent in a net zero. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the questions. Maybe I could add a wee question, comment myself as well, just to reflect on everyone's comments that it is a massive issue. There's particular issues in the rural area and obviously the urban area with the housing stock as well. And I think that's why housing and transport are so important to the issue, what you've chosen there in terms of a just transition, which is we need to take everybody with us and make sure we come out of this a better world, not where people are more less equal world. So I think it's really important as well what you've chosen. And I suppose that sustainability is framed sometimes as a problem. It's also an opportunity. Having a rural area is a massive opportunity for South Lanarkshire. What could be done with that land? How can you work with farmers and landowners to bring opportunities in for addressing peatland issues and so on, and making sure we sequester more carbon in our area as well. So I think South Lanarkshire's really well placed. There's opportunities as well as challenges. We know it's a challenge, but I think through your research, we can make sure that everybody is has a better world after your research in the next local transport plan and LDP3. So looking forward to it. And I think we can rise to the opportunity through collaboration and thinking differently early on. But we have to start doing all that 10 years ago, but let's do it now. So thank you very much, Sage. Happy to have a coffee with you and talk more. Okay, great. So now let's hear on the monitoring item 4 about the Sustainability and Climate Change Action Plan Q4 report, which will take us up to the end of March 2024. Could I invite Catherine McCafferty to speak, please?
Thank you, Chair. As you say, the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Action Plan for 23-24 at Q4. Section 3 of the covering report provides the background on the strategy and action plan. The Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy for 2022-27 was approved at South Lanarkshire Council on the 15th of June 2022. Delivery of actions within the strategy and associated action plans provide the main focus for sustainable development activity and also enables the Council to fulfil its duties under the Local Government Scotland Act 2003, the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009, and are also the Council's contribution to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The action plan is reported using Improve, and a full copy of the report can be found in Appendix 1. At the beginning of the Improve report, you will find the strategy diagram outlining the 4 themes of people, place, communities, natural environment and green economy. The report then provides the quantitative measures, both performance and contextual. The performance measures highlight progress towards each outcome. The contextual measures are not in the full scope of the Council, however, they do provide a health check for the area. The next part of the Improve report provides the progress for 2023-24 improvement actions towards each of the outcomes. Returning to the covering report, at section 4.2, you'll find a summary of the progress towards the quantitative measures. One red measure has been reported in Q4, and paragraph 4.3 provides an explanation of this slippage. Paragraph 4.4 summarises progress on the improvement actions. The majority were completed or still on schedule. Those improvement actions that have a green status are ongoing and will continue to be actioned as part of the new action plan. 2 red measures have been reported in Q4, and paragraph 4.5 provides an explanation. Paragraph 4.6 provides an overview of some of the key achievements for 23-24, including 1.5% of household waste was sent to landfill in 23-24, which is well below the target of 10%. The Lanark Air Quality Management Area was revoked in February 2024 as a result of air quality objectives being successfully met. Similarly, Worleys and Rutherglen Air Quality Management Areas are showing signs of improvement. The Council's Biodiversity Strategy and Biodiversity Duty Implementation Plan were approved by this committee in February 2024. An update on the delivery of the Litter Strategy Action Plan was presented to this committee in September 2023, along with a review of the action plan for the coming year. 45 South Lanarkshire schools currently hold Green Flag Awards, which is an increase of 10 schools from the previous year. And Green Flag accreditation was also successfully retained for Straven Park, Cambuslang Park and Castlebank Park. At Shatley Row Country Park, there is a new allotment site which opened in summer 2023 with an increase of 64 plots holders. There's been an introduction of a jump app for the secondary schools. 4 secondary schools currently use this, and this includes sustainable targets for pupils and staff with monthly prizes. A new Climate Change and Sustainability Officers Group has been set up to support the work of the committee and the steering group. And a Sustainability Impact Assessment process has been developed and implemented for the Council's capital and revenue programmes. Sections 5 to 9 of the covering report outline any implications for the report, including the financial implications. The actions detailed in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan are funded from existing resource budgets. However, the scale and pace of the action required to meet climate change targets will require significant capital investment, and are likely to require external funding and investment. If I can refer you back to section 2 of the covering report, the committee is asked to note the progress made at Q4 in respect of the actions and measures within the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan for 23-24. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Lots of great highlights there, but over to some questions from members. John Anderson's up first. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Chair. Page 24, we talk about a green flag, and I'm just wondering, with the recently commissioned project manager-led multidisciplinary team that was to support the development of a 10-year master plan for Calder Glen Park in East Kilbride, is the intention and the remit of this to bring this park up to the green flag status?
Can I ask Alison to speak to that, please?
Thank you. Yeah, the piece of work that we're underway with for the master plans for both Calder Glen and Châtellerault is moving at pace, and indeed we're actually doing public consultation in the parks at this moment in time. The strategy is looking at intervention in the parks over the next 10 years. And that will include hopefully some early wins for both parks, as well as some significant investment opportunities in the parks to respond to customer views and customer demands of the parks. And it may well be that as a result of that, there are opportunities to go for Green Park status, and that's something that I'm happy to pick up as we work through the stages. So at the moment in time, say we're out getting views of the public, and we've got a long list of shopping items, if you like. We need to work through this and prioritise the projects that are emerging for the parks, some of which will be around nature restoration, footpath upgrades, but there's also opportunities around visitor facilities and infrastructure improvements. So there's a wide gambit at the moment. We need to focus that into a strategy that responds to both what the public is looking for, what the council can deliver, and also look at external funding opportunities. And in due course, we'll come back to committees with reports on this.
Okay. Thanks, Alison. Thanks, John. Interesting point.
Can I just ask when we expect to see this strategy come forward and when we will get some updates on it? I mean, is it part of the 10-year plan starting now, or is it a 10-year plan after we got all this through?
What I'm proposing to do is, once we complete the consultation and undertake a review of the findings, that we come back to Hamilton and East Kilbride elected members to feed back on that, and also to gain your views on that. So we develop the strategies, and there are 2 separate master plans. We develop those in consultation with yourselves and with the community, and then the final document, the final master plans would come to community and enterprise, and I'm happy to bring them here also in due course. Now, that piece of work isn't due to conclude until the end of the year.
Thank you. Julia Mars, please.
Thank you, Chair. Given that on page 44, actions regarding school transport are already at amber, could I ask whether the environmental impact of the policy to cut school buses has been considered with cognisance to the greater number of private vehicles expected on the road?
Colin? Oh.
Right, could you say that again, Councillor? I missed the last part of it. Apologies.
Given the actions on page 44 of the report note that the actions for school transport are already at amber, has the environmental impact of the policy to cut the school buses agreed at the last executive been considered with the impact of the greater number of private vehicles on the road?
Thanks, Councillor. I'd probably have to kind of get Lynn Sherry to come back to you on that one. I do know that kind of equality, climate change impact assessments were undertaken in relation to that, but clearly a key part of the walking routes to school assessment will look to encourage walking to school and make sure that the infrastructure that's required is either already there and it's safe, or if it's not there, there'll be investment put in place to make it safe. So clearly going from 2 to 3 should encourage active travel. We recognise, however, that that may not always be the case, and parents may choose to still or move their children from buses onto the private car. Again, there's tools and resources we're looking at to encourage schools to help their children make that adjustment. I know from your kind of previous experience in the forum, you're aware of that. In terms of what we do in primary schools. So perhaps education colleagues can come back to you on that one at a later date. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia. An important point.
Supplementary, if you don't mind, Chair.
Yep.
So if the hoped for but unlikely reduction in car emissions is currently unknown, and that any reduction in carbon will be only if people are able to use sustainable and active travel. Can I ask how the net impact on the carbon emissions will be monitored following the reduction in the school buses, given that Lanark air quality management scheme was only revoked last year, given the pollution levels in 2 places of the town? And will any unlikely, in my opinion, reduction in carbon emissions effectively be at the expense of young people's well-being and education? I mean, basically, is this a just transition?
Thanks, Councillor Mars. Again, I think this is obviously rehearsed and kind of going over some of the debate from last week's Executive Committee. I think there's obviously plans and frameworks set out there for how education colleagues will move that decision last week on. A big part of it will be, as I said, to try and make sure the infrastructure is safe. How we measure it's a bit more challenging. You know, I think it's actually within this paper here, we talk about our Hands Up survey within our primary schools. Perhaps a way of monitoring would have to be done in discussion with colleagues in education. We could look at bringing in a similar monitoring regime at our high schools to understand how children are currently travelling and how they're going to travel in the future. And that would be a way of measuring that success or otherwise. Thanks.
Chair, with your indulgence, one further point.
Just one more.
Thank you, I appreciate that. That's very interesting regarding the monitoring. I wonder whether after 6 months of the policy being live, perhaps a detailed report with this monitoring could be brought to this committee.
David's going to respond there.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Mars. So a number of questions here are asking very specific to the education policy. And unfortunately, there's not an education representative here today. We'll take that back to education and we'll consider and report back on what the options are for that, because, as I say, it's unfortunate Lynn Sherry, who was at the executive committee when we talked about in some detail about the proposals for the school, is unable to make it this morning. But we'll take those comments back and we'll get a full response to them. Thank you.
I was speaking specifically on the point of carbon emissions, which I believe will be the remit of this committee, although I absolutely understand the impact on the education of our young people and the remit that education would have. But speaking specifically on the point of carbon emissions, I think it would be important for this committee to have that information and consider it in detail.
Thanks, Julie. I think we'll take that those valid points, and I think David's going to discuss things with education and see what they can come up with and respond to you, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to Robert.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I think we shouldn't lose track of the fact that the report actually contains quite a lot of very positive stuff, doesn't it, in terms of the movements forward. I was particularly interested in some of the stuff about the green flag achievements with the schools, which I think is actually quite a significant achievement in terms of involving young people who I think are the key to this in education development. There's obviously also other things, the low landfill and things like that. I want to ask, though, two particular things. One was about the, in a sense, a different aspect of the schools thing, the active travel to schools thing. Again, it's quite a good story in a way, in that around 60% of people are walking or cycling or going by public transport to schools. But the issue there is really whether we can actually increase that by a notable amount. And I wondered if there was any kind of guidance or successful projects in other areas that we're aware of that would give us a bit of lead on this particular matter, because it remains the fact that the bulk of other councils have the 3-mile limit for secondary schools. There's similar issues with regard to primary schools, an awful lot of congestion at school gates in primary schools and the like. I just wonder if there's any kind of developments there we can actually make a step change on that particular aspect. I've got another question, but it's a different issue, so maybe deal with that one first. Thank you, Chair.
Colin to respond on that one. You okay to respond on that one a wee bit, Colin, please?
Apologies, Councillor Brown. I missed that point as well. I was picking up something. Apologies for that. Could you just cover that bit again? Sorry.
Sorry, I was asking really about the 60% approximately rate of young people going to school by active travel methods or by public transport, and asking if there was any guidance or information or projects elsewhere that would give us kind of directions that might be of some help to try and move that upwards, because it's actually quite important to try and get away from the congestion at the school gates, with a particularly primary school phenomenon in many areas. Not to do with 3 miles and all that. It's all people coming from quite close by quite often, and yet they're using cars because of engagement with getting to work and all this kind of thing. If there's particular methods that have been successful there, we've tried the two schools at Burnside and the one in Blantyre with regard to the cul-de-sac orders and things of that kind. Are there more significant issues elsewhere where that's been there's this kind of projects and things we can look to take up, to copy on that regard?
I think what we're doing here at kind of South Lanarkshire is probably got a kind of wide toolbox. I think we talked about that before at the previous road safety forums. The kind of concept of car-free zones in and around schools kind of came via some of the work down in the borders in Edinburgh. We've done it at 2 locations here in South Lanarkshire. And there will be a report coming to a future forum. It wasn't easy to implement at schools. A few schools, and you need complete kind of school community buy-in. What we are doing, I'm part of the Scots Exec Group, and we're actually doing a survey at this moment in time just to understand how education, training and publicity and kind of sustainable travel has been kind of rolled out across Scotland, just to understand what resources councils have. We're probably fortunate enough to have quite an established team that does that, to try and learn from what's happening elsewhere, and actually a lot of other maybe smaller authorities come to us to ask what we've done and what they can learn from us. So perhaps when that survey concludes, we can bring it back either to a forum like this or maybe via the road safety forum as well. But clearly we're always looking about to see what other authorities are doing. And if there's any learning points, any members or others want to kind of point me towards, we'll have a look at it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Can I come back on a different issue, if I may? There's reference in the report to the glyphosate matter, weed killer and all that, which we raised in the last council, which is being monitored. I was interested in the fact that there's movement on the question of the wire, the kind of brushing out of the weeds as opposed to the weed killer prospect. And I wondered if there was any kind of what we can learn in terms of areas of success there, because it did strike me with the pressures there are on repair of pavements and roads. If we've got sort of dodgy pavements where it's beginning to crumble away, that sort of method has got its challenges, and therefore I wonder if we're using that in certain parts of the estate rather than others. Is there any information on any of that?
Able to bring in Kevin here, if you can respond on that online, please, Kevin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Brown. Yes, you're right. Just in terms of glyphosate, you'll note that since we started on the initiative to reduce our herbicide glyphosate usage, we've reduced it by about 30% in the first year, and we've maintained that. There's been another slight reduction this year. And what we've done with the Frontline First funding is we used some of that to bring in alternative equipment, as you suggest, such as the mechanical removal of some weeds, but it's only suitable in some areas. So what we've found is, you know, in East Kilbride, for example, we have lots of paved areas where we have weeds growing between the paving stones, and the mechanical sweeping suits an area like that rather than long standard tar paths. So it's proven very successful when we're using it, but we think we've got enough of that machinery now because it only suits particular types of environment.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Over to Ralph, please.
Right, thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. I'd just like to highlight section 4.6, key highlights. The first bullet point, that 1.5%, only 1.5% of household waste is sent to landfill. I would say that's a remarkable success. Something constituents don't really realise, because if they want to moan, they'll moan about, oh, it just goes to landfill, which of course it doesn't, or at least a minimal amount goes to landfill. The carbon cost of this, unfortunately, that the waste is sent in diesel lorries about 60 miles across Scotland to the recycle centre. That can't be helped. I mean, it's still an advantage. Probably in this report somewhere, it would be useful to know the amount of household waste which can't be fully recycled within South Lanarkshire, i.e. this is the waste which is sent to the Dunbar Centre, which is where we get this, you know, very, very low percentage of waste being sent to landfill. Thanks.
Thank you, Ralph. Could I bring in Kevin again to respond to that, please?
Chair, thanks, Councillor Barker. You know, unfortunately, we've got a number of waste processors, but not all of them are within the local area. We're very dependent on, you know, our procurement and tender processes and getting best value through that. And it's just a fact that not all waste streams are processed in South Lanarkshire. So we've got a number of, even some of our recycling contracts are out with South Lanarkshire as well. So unfortunately, there will inevitably be some carbon miles on that. But we can't lose sight of the fact that, you know, ultimately, as you've suggested, the good news is we're at 1.5%, you know, of our residual waste going to landfill now. You know, the majority then is going to treatment from an energy from waste facility, and the rest is actually being diverted to other recycling opportunities with waste processors. We are just unfortunate, and this goes for every local authority, we don't have specific processors for specific waste streams in every council area. And they tend to be at scale now as well in terms of the companies that offer those services.
Thank you. John Ross, please.
Yes, thanks very much, Kirsten. Just on a number of comments. One of them, and you've probably heard me beating on about this before, but it's Robert Brown brought it up as far as children travelling to school concerned by active travel, particularly cycling. You know, we're talking at a very, very small percentage here. We're actually if we look at the number of people in South Lanarkshire actually travel by cycle to their work each day, I think we're talking around about 1%, or it's not even measurable, unless we actually put into place cycle lanes on our roads, then we will not get this percentage up. I talk to so many people who will not use the roads who are adults because they feel endangered by other forms of transport. And unless we actually get to the grips with this, we will never increase the amount of people, adults and children, who will want to cycle. As an active cyclist myself, I know this, right? My other point was I wanted to congratulate the officers on the work they've done in Charleroi Park as far as the allotments are concerned. People I had talked to are really empowered by the fact that they can go to their allotments each day and work on these allotments. So more power to their elbow as far as that's concerned. And obviously, like John Anderson, I was also going to raise a question of just exactly where we're going with Charlotte Row Park, because I'm a great user of Charlotte Row Park, both for walking and cycling, and I'm always promoting it on Twitter for visitors to come and enjoy the wonderful atmosphere that's in the park. So green flag status is something I would really like to see for the park, as well as other parks throughout South Lanarkshire, but any help that we can give in order to try and secure that, I'm only too glad to see if I can be of help. Thanks.
Thanks, John. I wonder if we could just add to the wee bit on transport as well, because it links in with the question, then you won't have an extra one from me, Colin. On page 21, it highlights that South Lanarkshire is below average for all the walking, going to school, work, public transport methods, that we're under the Scottish average. I was just wondering, connected to John's point is there, as well as that transport being the largest source of emissions in Scotland and South Lanarkshire, how are we upscaling, accelerating, doing things differently to try and get some of the results that John wants and to meet some of the targets and a healthier population? Obviously, just to see how we're and addressing the school transport challenges that we saw. Are there going to be bike to school schemes? How are we going to ratchet all this work up to address the challenges?
Thanks, Chair. And just kind of maybe picking up John's question first and perhaps answering some of yourselves, Councillor Rob, and that. I would agree, Councillor Ross, that investment in maintenance and all of our road-related infrastructure is essential. We obviously have a prioritisation plan and a maintenance plan, which I can share with everybody. But clearly, that focuses on our road network, our footpath network, and as well as our cycling infrastructure. The problem we've had in the past, we've been very capital rich, and we have expanded our cycle networks where we can. And at the same time, we've tried to get more bang for our buck, if I can call it that. And when we're doing some new infrastructure investment, we look to kind of tackle some of our kind of maybe ongoing legacy maintenance priorities, whether that be improving footpaths, traffic signal control junctions as well. The bottom line is we don't have enough money to do our basic road level maintenance. And when I say road maintenance, I mean all road maintenance to keep our carriageways in a steady state condition requires £15 million, and we've got 11. So what we are trying to do is to prioritise where the investment is needed, and I think Councillor Rob answered this last week at Exec Committee when you asked the point. I'd love to be able to target some of our capital investment and our maintenance revenue monies towards walking and cycling, but I can't. I just simply don't have enough money to go around. So we are trying our best. We have been for many years been debating with colleagues at Scottish Government that when there is money identified for active travel capital investment, could we identify 20-30% of that to maintain what we've got? We've made some real good investment decisions over the years across Scotland, but some of that infrastructure is becoming tired, and we are struggling to maintain what is left. Picking up your own point, Councillor Rob, what are we doing? We are doing as much as we can this year. Last year we got just over £2 million for active travel. It was then known as Cycling, Walking, Safer Routes funding, and we implemented some of the kind of projects that are listed in this report in East Kilbride and elsewhere. We've got active travel studies across all of our towns and villages now, which identify on the back of community engagement what communities are looking for, what the attractors are, where people are living. And a bit like what I said to Councillor Barker earlier on as well, the funding might not be there now, but when it is there, we've got a policy position, strategy on the shelf that we can pull off and go, this is what we'd like to do. Now, clearly, we don't want to wait too long between that engagement and the funding coming, and it's trying to condense that as much as we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Okay, over to Margaret Walker.
Thanks, Chair. And it just goes back to some of the points that have been raised that Councillor Mars raised earlier on. My understanding, and Colin, I'm sure, and David will correct me if I've got anything wrong here at the Executive Committee, was that this will be a year before these changes are fully implemented. And during that year, some of the measures that you've been discussing, Colin, would be ongoing, but also things that were mentioned were obviously the community involvement aspect of that, because as the presentation alluded to earlier on, it's absolutely vital that you take the community with you in all of these changes and developments, and that you get the positive support from the community, because in the end, that will make at least some of it a lot easier to implement if the community have been involved in developing it. And what I heard at the executive meeting, in the areas, particularly where there is no or very little public transport, that we would look to have alternatives in place. One of the things was looking at negotiating with SPT in order, to have some more routes in those areas, looking at community transport options, the third sector involvement and all of that. There's been successful initiatives around that in the past. Safe routes, obviously, and getting the public involved in terms of highlighting to us where there's work needs to be done in that. Obviously, other alternatives have been mentioned, that perhaps a bike share scheme is worth looking at, and the cycle lanes. So there was a lot of positives, came out in that meeting in terms of presenting something that will provide alternatives before we come to the stage where we're actually implementing some of this. Unfortunately, due to some information and misinformation that that's all going out into the public domain, that's getting obscured at the moment. So it'd probably be quite useful if education and yourselves could give us a kind of programme of how we're going to consult and develop that over the coming months, because I think it's important we get that message out there. And also to reiterate, these are Scottish Government set legal distances. We would still be adhering to those, and that's a benchmark, for across Scotland. But I think it would be very helpful if, in the next, couple of months, 2 to 3 months, we had a picture of the measures that are being taken to try and mitigate the impact of this, and there will be an impact, particularly in areas where the levels of public transport are not very great. But I think if that could actually, if we could get maybe an idea of the timescale of it and who we'll be consulting with around that, and we get that out into the public domain, it would actually be very helpful in getting, contributions from people and getting their ideas, but a lot of this is going to be based on, you cannot, it'll be difficult achieving many aspects of this, as we've heard earlier on, but we certainly will not be able to do it if we don't bring people with us. Thanks.
Thank you. I think David's going to respond to that.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Councillor Walker. And you're absolutely right. There's a lot of, following the decision made at Executive Committee, there's it's putting in train a lot of work in terms of education resources, working along with roads and other colleagues across the council over the year before this is implemented. And I do know that colleagues in education are working at pace now, that decision has been made around those issues and how that programme of work will take forward. And I would expect they would come back with that programme to advise elected members as appropriate. And picking up some of the points from Councillor Marsh earlier, within that there's a carbon element as well. So that just becomes one part of that broad approach that needs to be taken across all those areas. So I do think you're absolutely correct in what you're saying, and I know that education colleagues are working on that at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I bring in Monique for the last question, Ross, did you want to come back on that particular point on anything? Or? Yeah.
And first of all, just for a correction, there is Scottish Government guidance, but the distance requirements come from UK Government legislation, not the Scottish Government. And if we're so keen to take people with us, which I absolutely agree on, then we should have listened to people in the consultation when they overwhelmingly rejected the proposals And if we're so keen on consulting on safe routes, which we absolutely should be, then I'm not sure why the council has repeatedly rejected our proposals to for a review of the road safety guidance that we use to assess safe routes. You know, it's a full package, so I don't believe you should come here and talk about disinformation and talk about all this consultation when in practice your actions suggest otherwise.
Thanks very much, Ross. I think we've aired both sides there, so thank you. Finally, over to Monique for a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a very good report, so thank you very much to the officers for preparing it. I just wanted to say that the Climate Change Scotland Act, which obviously was, I don't know, was that 2007, 2009? And it was obviously brought about to reduce the carbon emissions, which obviously is what this committee is about. I did look at, I actually watched online the executive committee, and one of the things I actually noticed in the paper from education was that they did talk about a section where, with regards to school transport, it would there would be a reduction on the carbon emissions, but it was carefully worded because it was about the council having a reduction, because they would have a reduction, because if they're no longer providing the transport, then that is going to be less for them. So I think that rather than get into the politics of he said, she said, in Westminster and Scottish Government, I think that the point that Julia brought up, which was our last point, which was that it should come here with regards to what is actually happening with the carbon emissions. I think that, and I understand why education don't actually know what the figure is just now, because it's like anything else. You need to put something into place before you can then basically monitor it. But I think what Julia said is really important, and we do actually, because none of us get elected to make people less well off or or to increase carbon emissions. So I think it would be very important that it is actually taken on, whether it's education or us, but that basically there is a monitoring of it. And it most definitely should get fed back to this committee, because this is the climate change committee. So I would ask you, Chair, you can advise me, how do we make sure that what Julia asked, because I think it was very important for it to come back to this committee? Do I need to put forward a motion, or is it just something that we could, look to? I don't need to put a motion forward. It's something that you as a chair just happy for it to be brought back. So if you could advise me, I would greatly appreciate it, because I think what Julia was asking is really important that we know the answer to.
Thanks very much, Monique. I think it's important to monitor any decision the council makes and the impact on the whole range of things, internal and external emissions. So I'll let David respond to that. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Councillor Monique, Councillor McAdams. Again, in terms of Councillor Marr's earlier questions, it's not that something can't come to this committee. So I think what we're saying, and expanded on through Councillor Walker's point, is that that we're at the start of that process in terms of our education colleagues, in terms of what the solutions will be for each of the areas, in terms of the school transport and the decision that was made at Executive Committee. Through that, and once that is known, we need to take account, as well as a range of other factors around, about how will that impact on the Council's carbon emissions. And to get an understanding of what that might be and how you might measure that, because it might not be something that is easily measured. And what I'm suggesting is that through the course as that is developed, there will be the opportunity to come back to this committee with a broader understanding of how that is and what can be achieved from it. So I think my point earlier in terms of the question, and you rightly raised that question as well, is just not to say that this can't be done. It's just that that I couldn't commit at this stage of how that would work because we don't have enough information on it. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. So where does that leave us then, David? Sorry, Chair, I should have said, can I jump in? Sorry, apologies. So is it then basically that it's an action that's going to be given to education, that it's going to be put in a plan, and then basically it's going to come back to us? Just so that we're clear, so it's not that I don't know what the actual answer or what the action's going to be. So how is it going to work that this is then put in place? Is it done as an action from our committee to their committee? How does it work?
David.
So thanks you, and thanks again. So I think, as I said earlier, we'll raise this issue with education in terms of the question that's been asked here. That will be considered amongst a range of other considerations that they're taking account of in terms of the proposals that were agreed at the last executive committee. And from that, they will be developing the education, and as I pointed out, are already working with colleagues across the council and developing what the proposals were and the plans are. Some of that, including the impact on climate change, will likely to be able to be reported through this committee. But the form of that, I don't know at this stage because we haven't been through the process. So it's something that will be recorded in the minute of this meeting that will go, and we'll ask that question in education. And at a future meeting of this committee, I'm sure education will be able to update us as to what the proposals and the extent to which that information can be captured and presented. As I say, I don't know at this stage in terms of what the solutions will be, because it will be different across each of the education establishments, in order to give you any firm commitment at this particular point on how we will capture that and present that information.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you. I see, Julie, you've got your hand up. Is it a point of clarification on this or a new question?
I think it's following on from the point that Monique and myself have already raised, and I am jumping to item 5, which I realise we haven't got to on the agenda. But in relation to what we are talking about now, the next paper we'll consider is an action plan, and priority 4, if I could point you to priority 4, that will look at number of trips being made by bike to the target to increase by 1% from the previous year, and the mode share of school children travelling by active or public transport to increase by 1% from the previous year. It would seem sensible to me that the environmental carbon emissions, and I mean environmental carbon emissions, not council carbon emissions, should be added to priority 4 of the action plan in item 5. I think that would be logical and transparent.
Yeah. Do you mind if we take that in the item 5 once the officer's presented on that, Julia? But I'll give them a wee moment to think about it whilst the officer's presenting, but we'll pick that up in the next item if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So just can I ask the committee to note the monitoring report on the action plan up into progress report. Thank you. And now just coming on to the item that Julie wants to raise something at, can I ask Adam Wallace to speak to the item to present the action plan for sustainable development, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to agree the action plan for the 2024-25 year of the Council's Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy. Section 3 sets out the background for this. The Council's Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy 2022 to 2027 was approved by the Council on the 15th of June 2022. The 5-year action plan for the implementation of the strategy was then approved by this committee on the 8th of February 2023. The 24-25 action plan is the second annual action plan under this overarching plan. The strategy sets out how the Council aims to develop sustainably and tackle the climate change emergency over a 5-year period. It also provides a broad strategic direction for longer-term planning. Delivery of the actions within the strategy provides the main focus for the Council's sustainable development activity and also enables the Council to fulfil its duties under the legislation noted at section 3.3. The action plan sets out the specific actions to be undertaken to deliver objectives under each theme of the Council's Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy. The action plan for the second year of implementation of the strategy is available in Appendix 1. The action plan was produced following extensive consultation with all council resources and key services. The action plan is split across 13 main priorities that were agreed as part of the development of the strategy, and these align with the 4 key themes of the Council's plan, with each action mapped to one of the 4 main themes noted at section 4.2. The action plan includes 2 sections: the performance and contextual measures towards the strategy's outcomes and improvement actions for each of the themes within the strategy. These are noted at section 4.3. In terms of monitoring, progress of the action plan will be reported to the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee at Q2 and Q4. The improved system will continue to be used to gather the progress from services and to produce the monitoring reports. Employee and financial implications are detailed at sections 6 and 7. And the Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan contributes towards the Council's responsibility to address climate change and act sustainably and in an environmentally considerate way. A full strategic environmental assessment was carried out alongside preparation of the strategy. Delivery will therefore have a significant positive impact in terms of the climate change, sustainability and environmental implications noted at section 8. An equality impact assessment was also carried out on the Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy and no adverse impacts were identified. The Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy and associated strategic environmental assessment underwent full public consultation for 6 weeks during February and March 2022. So to refer back to section 2, the recommendation is that the Council's action plan for 2024-2025 for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy as attached at Appendix 1 be agreed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adam. Just picking up Julia's point, do you want to, I think you're talking about page 74 about the target increase. Can you explain a bit more, can you explain again, now we're on that section, what you're looking for or what your question is?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, priority 4, to improve affordable, sustainable and accessible transport options. The measures in the action plan are to the number of trips being made by bike with a baseline year of 2019 to increase by 1% from the previous year, and also mode share of school children travelling by active or public transport with a baseline year of 2022 to increase by 1% from the previous year. Given the policy change at the last executive, I think those targets are probably achieved, potentially as a unjust transition for young people, potentially. Those targets probably should be reviewed, given the numbers of young people that are not going to be on their school bus anymore and will be forced, regardless of geography and safety, to walk and bike to school. But perhaps the council tonnage of carbon is less relevant than the full environmental tonnage of carbon that will result of this policy and could be included into priority 4 of this action plan.
So here are you asking about the internal council emissions to be included in this section?
Not the internal council emissions, no, because clearly they will go down. Right. Because the council will not be responsible for school transport. However, the number of private vehicles on the road has to increase, surely, given the limitations of public transport and the geographical impracticalities of walking or biking, especially in some of Clydesdale. So given those issues, can the full environmental carbon tonnage and the change in those figures be monitored and included in that target?
David? Sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Martin. We'll take this away and we can have a consider, but I just, in terms of this very specific thing you're asking to me, I don't even know if it can be measured, if I'm being entirely honest. So in terms of the, because you're talking about a very specific cars and vehicles for a very specific purpose, I don't know the means by which we would be able to capture that information. It's something that we can take away and we can consider, but I just, as I sit here, I don't think there's a method by which we would be able to measure in the sort of granular measure that would be required to measure the information that you're asking us to measure. So, but we're happy to take that away, and we can consider what might be able to be done on it.
With your indulgence, Chair, and without any disrespect intended, the priority for in the next report, the actions that are hopefully going to be achieved, the number of trips made by bike and the mode share of school children travelling by active or public transport. Surely there is a method of measuring those targets. So if we can measure the number of trips made by bike, the number of trips made by active and public transport for priority 4, surely we can also include the number of extra trips made by private vehicle going forward. I mean, surely that's a question to the school children within the schools, the same as this priority 4 report will give us.
Thanks, Julia. I think what was promised in the previous item was for education and David to look into this, how it's part of the monitoring and measuring, and we'll see what appropriate measures can be taken forward. I know the local transport plan itself will no doubt have action plans and measures, and we have a national target to reduce car miles travelled, so maybe that should be picked up somewhere, whether it's in the LTB or something in this. But Colin, did you want to add anything to that?
Thanks, Chair. And maybe just kind of picking up on some of the earlier points, I think what we're looking at here in priority 4 is a strategic measure for the whole of South Lanarkshire. So when you look at some of the earlier figures, the bit in the second part here about school children travelling by active or public transport, the annual National Hands Up survey has already demonstrated good positive movement in that. I think 59 up to 60 or something like that. We'll do that next year for primary school. I think that's largely what the Hands Up survey is focused at, is primary school. As I said in an answer earlier on here, perhaps a conversation to be had with education colleagues about how we can maybe expand that into maybe not every high school, but to some of the high schools that may be more significantly affected by this proposal. But I think we need to recognise as well that, you know, potentially, albeit I do accept perhaps unlikely, but this decision last week is taken away, and we're encouraging children to walk to school. We're looking to do walking routes to school assessments to make sure it's safe. We will achieve some of that. Some children within the 2 to 3 miles will make that decision to walk to school. Others may not have the option. So the decision last week does provide an opportunity for us to contribute to greater active travel. And as Councillor Brown said earlier, sorry, it was Councillor Walker said earlier on, there was a commitment given last week by education colleagues to work with local bus companies, community transport providers as well, to get children who don't have that choice to walk onto sustainable transport as well. So personally, I think this measure is at a strategic level enough, and some of the other measures through further steps in this process, we will bring back, to Councillor McAdam's point, we will bring back probably some further detail at some point, but we can't measure easily, as David said, what parents are choosing to do. You know, parents are choosing to bring their children to school by car. That's going to be difficult to capture in detail, but perhaps the Hands Up survey, a slightly expanded one, could be the answer. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I think the Hands Up survey does break it down into how people get to school. So definitely, I think allow education and David to come back and how they'll monitor the policy and what measures could be introduced to make sure we've got the information that members want on monitoring that policy and how any changes are being monitored for how people travel to school through the Hands Up survey. that okay? Okay, move on to Robert, please.
Really, in a sense, on the same point, I think we're going a bit off beam here, not to beat about the bush, because it seems to me that what we're talking about here is the action plan for 24-25. The stuff that's been talked about with regard to the changes in the school distance is for the period after August 25. So it's not affecting the action plan for this year in that particular context. Now, I've always thought it's important to try and increase the number of children who walk and cycle to school. I think it's a key objective we should be focusing on. But it's very much something which will be focused on, to my mind, at least on individual schools. And I think when we had the debate on the school transport thing, I made this particular point, and I asked specifically, were we going to be looking at what the effects would be on the particular high schools that were affected by the proposal? And I think that's the way to tackle this, because I think this is broader than just the school transport thing. It's a matter which affects, I think, almost every primary school in our individual localities have got congestion problems that emerge from lots of people taking cars to school, where perhaps there's some scope for reducing those numbers. Now, we've done, in a sense, quite well with the 60% I spoke about before. But in terms of the actual moving forward on this, I think what we need to do is identify the high-level objective, which is in the report. That's the 1% over the previous year. That's the high-level strategic report, as Colin rightly says. And I think the issue then becomes one, how do we achieve it? What can we actually do which makes a difference to moving along the objective, I think, which we all have, to reduce the number of people who go to school by car in effect? And I think that's the thing we need to work out as we go forward with the action plan.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think we're going to expect some reports back on how these things are monitored and what more can be done. I think Colin mentioned earlier about looking at best practice elsewhere, and there might be capital investments, but there might also be cultural things or community level things that can be done. I would only say myself that these things all take time. So, okay. So thanks very much. Are there any more questions on this report for the action plan for the coming year? Julia?
Chair, I'm still not clear, and just for my own clarity going forward, I'm noting, there's a lot of priorities in this report that are noted as contextual, and I think that this is the point here, that the priority 4, I wholly would support the people to use sustainable and active travel where appropriate. But if I could point you towards one particular safe walking route in my ward, where Kirkfield Bank-Bray has a 1 in 14 gradient, I would really like to see some of my colleagues get on a bike or walk up that hill and feel energised to learn at the top of that. And actually, beyond that, you've still got a mile to walk to the school. But that aside, the context of priority 4 is very important. And I think we all, as a council, want to be doing the best for South Lanarkshire and to have priorities and targets that are transparent and fully explain the point. It's great if we can see an increase in bikes and safe walking to school. However, I think the context against the environmental tonnage of carbon alongside that is very important. So I'm still not clear what we've actually agreed going forward of exactly how this will be monitored.
I think what people are saying are we're not proposing any changes to how it will be monitored through this committee, but Education and David are going to work together to look at monitoring that particular policy, and then I'm sure the local transport plan will have targets and aspirations that it will also introduce some monitoring, because you're right, we do absolutely need to monitor the positive things like increases in walking and cycling, but with transport emissions being the highest, the largest contribution to climate change, we absolutely need to monitor the other side as well if there's going to be increases. But I think that might be monitored elsewhere and through the LTP. Maybe Colin can clarify that, and through the monitoring of that particular policy. Is there anything that the officers want to add to that?
Thanks, Chair. And I suppose, the Chair's position that is outlined is correct. We'll take this back and we'll look at it in terms of education, but the difficulty remains in terms of, as I previously mentioned, to measure on a granular basis some of the information that you're asking for, Councillor Mars. And I'll just pick up again the point that Councillor Brown has made, which is this action plan is for 24-25. Anything that we'd be able to measure from that would not appear in this action plan, but in the action plan for the subsequent year, because that would then be in terms of the implementation of the decision that was made Executive Committee in regards to the education distances. So it wouldn't be for this action plan anyway. And I'll again refer back to saying there is some work that education is undertaking in terms of what the actual detail is going to be in terms of each of the schools and each of the safe walking distances and safe walking routes. And through that, information will become available, and it may be that we're able to capture some of the information you're asking for once that more information is known about it. But we're not in a position at this stage to be able to commit to being able to capture that information, and it wouldn't be for this year's report as it is.
I think we've talked about this quite a lot in this item and in the last item, so I think we'll move on. But I think the points you raised are absolutely valid, Julia and Monique, and I think we can maybe discuss that for a future action plan linked to the local transport plan that's coming up, and the monitoring report that David and Education are talking about. So your points will be taken on board and looked at in the current year for the other committees in the LTP, but also for maybe the action plan, consider it for a future year as well. So thank you very much. Okay, can I... is that okay, Julia, if we move on? If we have talked about this specific issue quite a lot. Yep. So can I ask for the committee to agree the action plan for the coming year? Thank you. Okay, so and now on to the item for noting is about a model for climate investment, which is an enormous issue, big challenge, but also big opportunities. So can I ask Michelle to speak to that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. The purpose of this report is to provide background information on Glasgow City Council's recently announced model for climate investment and the potential implications and opportunities for the whole Glasgow City region, including South Lanarkshire Council. In item 3 of the report, we provide some background. Glasgow City Council has published details of a proposed climate model, which it has developed in response to a shortfall in the finance it requires for its net zero projects. The proposed model will see the creation of a specialist green investment team at a cost of £4 million over 2 years, tasked with unlocking the £40 billion needed for the city's ambition to be net zero by 2030. At item 4, we describe how the project is being led by the Council's finance, legal and procurement teams, costing £1.8 million over 2 years, and the external expertise has been brought in the way of legal and procurement support, costing £2.2 million over the 2 years. Strategic direction of this project is provided by the Leader of the Council, and a political oversight group will ensure appropriate governance, long-term political stability and provide advisory capacity. At item 5, we note that this model has been created in recognition of the fact that public sector funding alone cannot provide the investment required to achieve net zero ambitions. With this new investment team, Glasgow City Council hopes to attract investment from the private sector. In essence, Glasgow City Council are exploring potential for a public-private partnership or concession agreement. This would see investment in areas such as low and zero carbon heat networks, renewable energy from wind and solar, energy efficiency and smart energy systems. The new model would effectively help the Council unlock access to capital from the private sector and other sectors such as pension funds. Any funding arrangement will have its own separate governance and decision-making process, similar to a fund management company. This means that projects led by other Glasgow City stakeholders who are out with the Council could be taken forward as long as the projects are commercially viable. In terms of the timeline, at the end of this 2-year period, it's hoped the Glasgow City Council will be in a position to begin investing in identified projects. They will have established appropriate legal structures, identified suitable procurement routes, and developed a series of shovel-ready projects, starting with their local heat and energy efficiency strategy. It's worth noting that no capital works are expected to have been undertaken within these first 2 years, which the funding covers. Item 6 describes how Glasgow City Council undertook a review of similar climate investment models happening elsewhere and concluded that the only examples were in England or internationally. 2 case studies of climate investment models in Bristol and London are provided in the report, where partnerships and climate funds with multi-million-pound profiles have been formed between the public and private sectors. At item 7, we refer to the potential impact for South Lanarkshire Council. The Glasgow City Council proposal refers to the potential for this model to be extended across the whole Glasgow City region, and they state that once the approach has been agreed, they will commence discussions with regional partners. We've been told that the Glasgow City Council report is due to be tabled at a future Glasgow City Region Cabinet meeting. In terms of next steps, at item 7.3, we state that we'll continue to monitor the development of Glasgow City Council's model for climate investment and that we'll engage with colleagues across the city region on it. Obviously, this process could inform our own approach to securing investment to realise our own ambitions around heat decarbonisation and net zero. In terms of employee implications, at 8.2, we describe how we've already met with the project lead from Glasgow City Council and have agreed with her that we'll continue engagement with her as the Green Investment Project develops. We have a further meeting arranged for September 24. Whilst we note at item 9 that there are no financial implications for the Council at the moment, if the model is rolled out to the Glasgow City region, there is potential for the Council to be asked to contribute financially to the ongoing costs of the new investment team. But at item 10.1 on financial implications, we note that if the model is rolled out across our region, there are potential benefits for South Lanarkshire Council in terms of meeting our own climate change, sustainability and environmental ambitions. I refer you back to the recommendation at 2.1 that the content of the report be noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I think it's quite rightly ambitious, and we've seen from previous studies at this committee how the scale of ambition that we need to have for this, but also the co-benefits, tackling fuel poverty, creating green jobs, renewable energy income generation for the public sector. So I think there's a lot of potential. So can I bring in John Ross for a question, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, Kirsten, and thanks very much for the report. It was just a couple of points of clarity. We're recommending that we note this report, and the last speaker said that there was going to be no financial implications for South Lanarkshire at this time. Are we not contributing at all to the setup of the initial 1.8 million and the 4 million involved in the setup to take this forward? Is this all going to be done through Glasgow City Region management team? You know, I remember my time when I was on the Glasgow City Region, and we spoke about this and the problems involved in trying to do the infrastructure for some 1 million homes, and the cost that would involve, the companies that would involve, the materials that would involve, and if that was spread to other regions throughout Scotland and then England, the mammoth task that we were looking at ahead. So I'm just wondering, at what point will we become involved, or are we going to become involved at some time in the whole concept? It's the only way to go. If we're really interested in achieving net zero, then we really need to take the bull by the horns and get in there and do what we can, both as a council and a region, to make this happen. Thanks.
Thanks, John. I can see your passion there. Thank you. David's going to pick that up.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Ross. And Michelle, correct me if I've got this wrong, but as I understand it, this is not a kind of city region project. It's a Glasgow City Council project at this stage, and we're engaging with them on that basis. So the £1.8 million and the £4 million that they talk about there is as Glasgow as a council, not so much Glasgow as a region. As I understand it, there may be the opportunity and some thought given to this broadening out into a city region initiative. And what we've wanted to do, John, is to make sure that we're in early and having early conversations with Glasgow City Council as we understand how this model might work for South Lanarkshire, as well as looking at a range of other models such as Bristol and others as well, and to be having early engagement and a good proper understanding for ourselves as officers and for you as elected members of how this might look if it does start to expand into a city region project.
Thank you. Robert, over to you for a question.
Yes, I just wanted to strongly welcome this. I take John's reservations to some degree about the matter, but I think this is a hugely potentially dynamic project, if you like. And I think it is important, and I think Dave has given us that assurance that we are in on the ground floor as far as we can be. I think it actually brings out two other points as well, because the city region, again, John touched on this, has proved to be quite an effective vehicle for looking at major city-wide, city region-wide investment potential. We've obviously got partnerships through Clyde Gateway and otherwise as well in this particular way. And a lot of these things, I think, have worked better than they would have done as individual council authorities. And the structures are now quite well developed at the city region level to enable this to happen. And I think it's really quite important that that is the case. The other thing is, I don't quite know if there's any relevance to this in the background. We don't yet know what the new government at Westminster will do in terms of continuing the various UK Levelling Up Fund, Single Prosperity Fund and all of that. But there must be some potential of being able to access in some funding in that direction as well to support projects like this. And I wonder if David knew anything about that as yet, and whether indeed there was any potential for going forward with that. So I think hugely important we're in on this. Hugely important we do our best to be as close to the action as we can be. But I think the reality, I suppose, is that it's been started by Glasgow, and we have got to fit into that particular context, I suppose, to some degree.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Alison's going to come in.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Just picking up your point around UK government and funding opportunities. I actually met with UK civil servants last week, and looking at essentially trying to get an update on likely funding sources and timescales for that. So there is obviously a lot of conversations taking place at both a UK and Scottish government level. But I think unfortunately from us there's no clarity over policy yet, or indeed timescales for that, and everything does seem to be hanging or pinging around the budget at the end of October. So I fear that we might not get some clarity around funding until later in the autumn.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Monique, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to say that obviously I welcome this report, and I think and I'm happy for it to be noted, and it's a good paper to come forward because there's lots of interesting stuff in it. And I think it would be good for us to be in it from the start, because I think that in the past, like in all authorities, there have been mistakes made. And I think that we would be able to pick up good learning points, and it means that things as they go along, you know, it means that we'll be able to like learn by, you know, being the smart people, like learn from somebody else's mistakes rather than having to make the mistakes ourselves, and then learn it that way. So, because I was actually just thinking about the taxi drivers that were disadvantaged in Glasgow. So I think that as long as, well, I suppose it doesn't really matter actually, because I was going to say as long as it's really thorough, but even if it's not thorough, then that's something, if we were going to like take it on, that would be something that we would learn from it anyway, to make sure that there's not one section of society that's then disadvantaged. So it's just to say I do welcome this, and I think it's a really good report. So it's a good starter for 10. And so thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to come back? No, just keep monitoring it. I think they're pretty close to the action to keep monitoring it and see when or if South Lanarkshire wants to take part. But yep, it's a good opportunity. It's going to be decades of work and investment. So lots of good opportunities for just transition and green jobs and so on. So it sounds good. Thank you very much. Can I ask committee to note the reports, please? Thank you very much. and there's no urgent business have been intimated, so just to thank you for coming to the meeting. Oh, sorry, my apologies, Richard Lockhart, the last question.
A rural councillor ignored as of